All right, so what I want to do is bridge between what happens when you turn in your Excel spreadsheet with the variable names, which is your very last group step that you're doing. Okay, so one group is through that step, two more are kind of finishing up three, approaching that step. And I don't think that step takes too long, but it is important for me to be able to release the data to you. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bridge from that step to the final step with the data, which is writing it up in your research report. So it's actually a rather big gap. So we're gonna spend some time together kind of going through it. Okay? So if we were progressing through this as a regular class, doing a regular experiment, what would happen is you guys would develop your materials, your group would all agree on it, I signed off on it, you would have actually given it out to participants to actually take as the true experiment. Okay, so you would have given them hard copies, emailed them out, could have potentially done it on Qualtrics as well, so an online data collection program. We discounted that, we took it out because of the fact that I think it would take us too long to do, and I didn't want to put more on you guys, and I definitely didn't want to put more on others to try to have to do that for someone else. Now it's too busy for those kind of things. So it's really unfortunate that we had to take that step out because it's a lot of fun to collect that data and to see how participants would have actually responded versus getting the kind of fictitious data that I'm putting together. So I'm sorry we don't have that opportunity. If you want to follow up with me later on to do that, I'm all for it. Okay? So you would have normally done that. You would have gotten responses on the scales that you provided. Okay, so they would have circled an answer. Those answers would have then gone into the Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so for each row that you had, it would have been a participant, and you would have recorded their responses in that Excel spreadsheet. Okay, does that make sense? Can you kind of visualize what that looks like? Okay. The next step from there is you would have taken the particular responses over the course of a questionnaire. So let's say the basic needs, and you would have created an average for each participant. Okay, so we don't analyze individual items. It's not helpful for us, but rather we combine them together to see how well they work at predicting the outcomes or assessing the outcomes based on your manipulation. Okay, so we would create an average of the basic needs for each individual participant, okay, and your other DV. We then take those averages of participants and we put those together and create averages of the conditions. Okay, so again, we don't look at individual participant responses. We look at how participants responded, averaging the scale together, and then averaging how participants responded in that particular condition. Okay, so if you watch Dr. Bernstein's video, okay, which you should if you haven't, if you did already, perfect. Okay, he's basically showing you what the average was or what the response was for each of the conditions. Okay, so he just had one response. For us, we would have had several items that we would put together to create an outcome. Okay, so we would average those together. We would then look at the means for each of the conditions. And so that's where we're going to pick up with me kind of walking you through things, is seeing what those averages look like and the analyses we do and how we write those up. Okay, so let me pause at this point to see what questions you have, thinking about the point at which we ended with the Excel spreadsheet to the point where we start analyzing the data. So things that don't make sense, things I can clarify. And again, lots of questions today are going to be really key for things. So anything you guys can think of. All right, and if we have to take a step back, if you have a question from a previous step that comes to you, we can totally do that. So what I have provided to one group and what I'll provide to you guys is this document or example of this document. So give me just a second to pull things up here. Sorry, as soon as I go to look for something, then I can't find it. Where are you? Hang on, guys. Too many things open with too many classes going on. Just a second. Okay, here we go. All right, so everyone on their screen should see something that says basic needs in the upper left-hand corner and a series of results. So is this the case for you guys? I just want to make sure we double check. All right, so seeing some head nods indicating that we're okay here. Okay? And again, as we're going along, let me know what questions you have, either through chat, jump in, things like that. Really wanted you guys to feel comfortable asking questions. So what's going to happen is that once you've given me your Excel data sheet, okay, what I will do is I will generate fictitious data for you. Okay? Again, you should never, ever, ever do this. We're simply doing it for academic purposes. Never do this for research purposes. in this data, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you several pieces of information, all of which are going to be critical for interpreting your data and then using this information to write up your results. Okay, so we're going to walk through it step by step so you guys can see what information I'm giving you and how you're going to pull it out and use that in the write-up of your results. Okay, so all those statistics that you saw and all those papers that we looked at the beginning of class, this is how that process goes for those authors. The first thing that you'll see for the outcome that you're interested in my case, I'm going to look at basic needs, is I'm going to give you a descriptive table. And in this descriptive table, it's going to tell you the means, it's going to tell you the average for how participants respond in each of those conditions. So for each of these conditions, okay, there's a mean that's generated by pulling all the responses together. Okay? So you'll remember in my study, I had a condition where participants were included by the group, okay? A condition where a group member left, and a condition where the participant was ostracized. Okay? So for each of those three groups, okay, I have a mean. And so when you get your data, the first thing to do is just simply look at these means so you can see what the pattern of results look like. In this case, I have it scored that higher values equals greater satisfaction of basic needs. Okay, so this means that the included group had the most satisfaction at 4.1. The group member left was worse at 1.76, okay, and ostracized was at 1.91. Okay, so these are our means. They tell us what the average was for the participants responding in that condition. Next to that mean is the standard deviation. So this tells us how much variability there was in terms of how participants responded. So this is one standard deviation away from the mean. Okay, so capturing what the range was, positive or negative, for 64% of our sample. Okay, so standard deviation here was about 0.5 point, a little less for both the group members left and the ostracized. Okay. When you're reporting the means in your results, okay, you're going to report the mean for that condition and the standard deviation. Okay, so that's the first piece, kind of hinting at things we'll be talking about what you report in your outcomes. You can report the mean, you can tell me what the average was, and the standard deviation. The standard deviation tells me how much variability there was in that particular response. The mean tells me how participants responded on average in that condition. Let me pause here to pick up any questions you guys have. If you're good, let me know over chat, thumbs up, things like that. I'm going to ask a lot of these, kind of pause a lot of these times because I'll make sure we're set with things. So anything you guys can think of, or we're good so far. Okay, so thumbs up if we're good so far. Okay, good. If you're on chat, go ahead and just jump in, say you're good. Now, the results that I'll give you guys will generate the three means. Now, the question we have as researchers, the question we have in this class is, do those means vary? Okay, do they significantly different from each other? And because we want to know if they're significantly different from each other, because we want to know if our manipulation produced a different response depending upon what group participants were assigned. Okay. That's where this one-way ANOVA statistic comes in. Okay, so the next piece of information I'll give you is a one-way ANOVA. The one-way ANOVA test basically is saying, hey, there is differences between conditions. Okay, it's not telling me where the differences are. It's just simply saying that, hey, if we look at all those three means that we were just reviewing, okay, those three means at the top that are still there, that there's some difference among all of those variables, okay, or among all those means, I should say. So that's our we call it an omnibus test. Okay, we talk about it as kind of an overall test to say, hey, are there any differences? And if there are differences, significant differences, that means that you can then go on to figure out, well, which condition is different from each other? Now, in looking at my results, the key thing I look at here is if this is significant. Okay? So if a value is significant, a p-value is significant, what benchmark does it need to reach? What value does it need to be below? Okay, so p equals what indicates that it's something below p equals what means it's a significant finding. Okay, this goes back to basic stats, guys.
0.05.
Okay, perfect. So any value, any significant value of p less than 0.05, okay, means it's a significant finding. Okay, so we see the memes about 0.05, things like that. Nerdy psychologists walking around with t-shirts that say less than 0.05. That basically says that there's only a 5% chance that differences that are occurring were just by randomness. So in this case, we can look at it. We can say that this is less than 0.05. Okay, it's less than 0.01 in fact. Okay, so we know from the fictitious results that I generated, so of course I'm going to make them look good, that there's a significant difference somewhere in this mix between conditions. This is our F value. This is part of that ANOVA statistic. You're going to see really, really huge, weird F statistics. This is absurdly large. This is because I don't know how to make fake data, which is usually not a problem because you're not supposed to do this anyways, right? So you might see some really bizarre numbers. Don't worry about that. All right, so this is our second piece. I'll talk a little bit more about what information you pull out of this for the research report. But the key thing here when we look at this is say, is there an overall significant difference between our groups? And that's what this omnibus test is telling us. So imagine writing this up, imagine processing the output when you get it. Okay? What questions can you kind of anticipate here? Okay, so kind of anything that kind of comes to mind. Okay, all good? Okay, so far so good? Okay. All right, so we've gone through, we talked about means. We talked about this omnibus test saying, hey, we need to look at this first to see if there's any difference between our means. Okay. If this omnibus test is significant, now what we want to do is we want to go back in and we want to say, well, how are these means different from each other? Okay, so what group is different from the other groups? Okay. And so to do that, what we do is we do what's called a post hoc test. Okay, so this is a test afterwards that compares each of the different conditions to each other. Now, there's a variety of post hoc tests. The one that we're using is called LSD. And it's least squared denomination, I believe. Don't quote me, but I think that's what it is. Okay? And this is a very liberal test, meaning that it really works towards finding differences. Okay? Other post hoc tests will be more careful and correct for the fact that you're doing all kinds of comparisons. This one doesn't. Okay? So this is not a good test in kind of functionality, but for our purposes, it kind of helps make things a little bit easier for us. So what I need to do now as a researcher is I need to see, well, which conditions are different from others. In my particular study, I'm interested most in this group member left condition. Okay, so I want to see how do the inclusion and ostracism conditions compare to this group member left condition. So I can look at this and I can compare it to the included condition. Okay, so one group member left the group versus all group members stay in the group, the participant was included. And I can see that because this significant value is less than 0.05, that there's a significant difference between group members leaving and included. Okay, so going back to those means, you can see that when a group member left, participants felt less basic need satisfaction compared to when they were included. Now, the other condition I want to make a comparison to is the group member left with the ostracized condition. Now, in this case, the value is 0.139. So think about P equals less than 0.05 and any value below that being significant. Is this a significant result or not? Okay, so I'm seeing some heads shaking no. You're absolutely right. Okay, so this is not a significant result, meaning that at least in terms of the basic needs, a group member leaving and a group member being ostracized by the group, the participant being ostracized by the group, are causing similar results. They're not statistically significant from each other. So I find that a group member leaving is worse than being included, but a group member leaving is the same as being ostracized. They're similar, produces similar results to it. Now, there's one last comparison that you have to make. Remember, we have to make sure all the groups are being compared to each other. So the last comparison group I need to make is I need to look at ostracized and included. Okay, so if I compare the included condition with the ostracized, okay, as we would imagine for previous research, there's a significant difference there. Okay, so I also need to make that comparison as well. So don't forget about, all the different comparisons that you have to make. If you go back to the second or third video I made, talked about all the different comparisons between groups. Make sure that you're doing that. Okay, we also worked on that in the step 2 of our write-up, kind of talking about the outcomes. You did that as well a little bit in step 1. That's why we did it, so you guys would see all the comparisons. Okay, so this table is telling us which conditions are actually different from each other. This is probably the most informative table that we have once we know that there's differences overall. So let me pause to see if there's any kind of questions you want me to address at this point. Again, lots of kind of pausing, kind of give you guys a chance to think things through. Okay, what I'll do is I'll show you the last piece of output that I'll give you. I'll talk a little bit more about the output, and then we'll talk about how you're going to write this up. Okay, so the last piece of output I'll give you, okay, is a means plot. So basically, you can look at the means at the very beginning, and you can look at the numerical values. I'll also give you a visual depiction of this. Okay, so if we had more time, I'd have you guys include graphs in your paper. We won't worry about that because of time limits. But you can see from this, you can see what the pattern results are. Okay, so you can see included people are feeling pretty good. When the group member leaves or they're ostracized, they feel, bad, and they feel equal to each other. So what exactly I was just talking about with the post hoc test gets demonstrated in this means plot. Okay, so one thing you might do is look at the means at the very beginning. You could scroll down to where I have the means plot then to see visually what those differences are. All right, so when you get your output from me, you're going to get a front sheet that's going to say notes. In those notes, it's going to tell you how things were scored. So it's going to say values were scored so that higher values equals greater basic need satisfaction. That's important for you to be able to interpret the results. I'll also include notes if you have multiple manipulation checks. I'll say you just have to write one up for your paper, but you're welcome to write up all the other ones. I'll just take that as kind of doing a great job being thorough and kind of keep that in mind as I look at your paper. I'll also note kind of anything else. Maybe if your scale had multiple parts, I'll talk about how I handled that, things like that. So make sure you read through those notes. You'll then see that I will give you first the manipulation check results. Okay, so we didn't go through mine because they're just a little bit weird to understand. And then I'll give you the results for both of your dependent variables. Okay, so in my case, it was basic needs. And the second one was feeling dehumanized. I'll also then give you demographic information. You'll need to include that when you talk about your participants. Okay, so that piece is also a piece that I'll give you as part of your output. If any of those pieces are missing when you get this output, please let me know right away. I just missed it. I'm trying to generate data, get a whole bunch of things organized correctly for you guys. So if I miss something, don't hesitate to let me know. Okay. I will email out the data to you once I have your step 4 completed. So it might take me just a little bit to get it wrapped up. I have the data prepped for most of you guys. Give me just a little bit, but this will be what you'll see afterwards. All right, so I'm going to pause here, give you guys a minute to think about if there's any questions in terms of looking at the data that you want me to address, anything that kind of seems unclear at this point. And it can be any question that you guys can imagine at this point. All right, so I want to get a thumbs up from everyone, make sure I've got everyone. So either thumbs up on cam if you got it. If you're not on cam, send me a chat message saying that you're good. I'm going to wait till we get a response from everyone because make sure we're all on the same page because this is important and it's also trickier because we're doing this online. Usually I can see the confused looks on everyone's faces and know where we're at. Okay, so appreciate Ross has chimed in. Others of you making sure that we've got this. All right, I think we've lost some people already. This is how professors know who's paying attention and who's not. Ask these kind of questions. Okay, so hopefully as we're going through, we get it. Okay, so now I give you the output. The next piece of this is important is how you're going to write this up. Okay, so the writing up of this these results is the ultimate kind of finale of what we're doing here. Okay, so you should see on the screen something that says results in a paragraph format. Do you guys see that, or you still see something else? Okay, so hang on a second. Let me fix the share. Okay, do you guys see something now written out? It says results, manipulation check. Okay, we're good. Okay, thanks. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to talk about what information that you're going to put in, and we'll keep referring back to the basic need satisfaction. Okay. Now, to help you guys out with this, my output and this write-up are already on Carmen in the module talking about writing your output. So you can take this video, go through it in case you have questions. You can look at the output that I have and see how it translates into the write-up. You should be looking at Dr. Bernstein's video if you haven't already. He'll help you kind of make that link between data analysis and here, have it make more sense. When I wrote up my results, I wrote it up in a couple different formats so you guys can get kind of a couple different ideas of how you want to do it. But we'll walk through kind of what's most important to say. Okay. So for each of these results, the first thing I would do if I were you is I'd read some of the results sections of the papers that we had that you thought were helpful. That gets you in the right mindset. It gets you thinking about things. It'll make it much easier for you. So spending just 10, 15 minutes doing that may seem like a waste, but it'll be a huge help. That's exactly how I write my papers. Okay, spend a few minutes getting into the right mindset. Okay? When you write up your results, okay, there's 3 key components that you need to have. Okay, so write this down if you're taking notes someplace. One is you need to have all the means for all the conditions. The second is you need to have the results for the one-way ANOVA. And the third is you have to tell me the post hoc test for all the comparisons that you're making. Okay, so means for all the conditions. Okay. Overall ANOVA. Okay, so that tells me if it's overall significant. And the post hoc comparisons for each of the comparisons. Basically, when I look at your section, that's the first thing I'm going to look for. I'm not hiding at all any of the way I'm grading this stuff. I will give you full rubric disclosure, especially as we get into Tuesday. That's the first thing I'm going to look for. The second thing I'm going to look for is, can I read your results and have it make sense? So regarding that second piece, one of the things that's much easier to do is to just write this paragraph and put the statistics in later. Okay, so I definitely encourage you guys to do that. If you're taking notes, I would say write the paragraph first, then put the stats in later. Otherwise, the stats, as you're dropping them in, just disrupts your thought process. If you're writing a good results paragraph, you should be able to just read the results and not need the numbers at all. Okay, so that's the second benchmark I'm going to look at. First being, do you have all the right information in? The second being, can I read it without looking at the numbers and know exactly how the results look? Okay, so you might even go through the exercise of taking the means out when you're all done and see if it makes sense. Okay, so those 2 pieces seem to make sense clear for you guys. So that's kind of the overall evaluation. Okay, so let's go through this example. Again, I wrote each of the paragraphs up slightly different to kind of give you different looks. Okay. So here I start off with saying there was an overall significant difference between the inclusion condition, group member leaving condition, and ostracism condition. So you'll see in that very first sentence in this particular example, I covered 2 of the 3 things we need to have, right? I have the means for each condition. And in this case, I put them as close as I can to the condition that I'm talking about. Okay, so you'll see the inclusion mean is as close as I can to that group. Okay? I then have the mean for the group member leaving and the ostracism condition. Okay? You may see in the write-ups that you have, they might do like delayed responses where they talk about comparing the means. In your case, just put them as close as you can to the condition that they belong in. The second piece that I picked up was that one-way ANOVA. Okay, so this one-way ANOVA is basically, again, supporting this sentence saying that overall there was a difference between these conditions. When you write up your one-way ANOVA, here's the information that you're looking for. Okay, so you can format it exactly like this. I have a Word document online, so you can steal the format right out of it. This is your first degree of freedom that you're going to report and your second degree of freedom. Okay, so let me show you where these values come from. When we start first with reporting our degrees of freedom, okay, we're going to go back to that output. Okay, so give me just a second to get back to our output. Okay, so you guys see the output now. We're good? Outputs in front of you? Okay, I just want to check. Okay, so here our first degree of freedom is between groups. Okay, so that's basically saying we're take the number of groups minus 1, which is 2, okay, and within groups. Okay, so this would be the number of participants we have minus 2, okay, because we have the number of groups we have. So you're going to report the first degree of freedom, which is 2 in this case, second degree of freedom, which is going to be 87. Okay. I'll give you guys a hint. When you write yours up, your first degree of freedom will always be 2 because we're comparing 3 groups. But your within group is going to vary because I changed the number of participants you guys have in your fictitious results. You'll then see I report the F value, which is right here. And then I report the P value. Whenever the P is 0.000, we don't say it equals that because at some point there's some number. We say it's less than 0.00001. Okay, so I'm going to report the degree of freedom, 2 and 87, the F value here, okay, and the significance of that finding. Okay, so let me switch back to the previous screen. All right, so again, first degree of freedom, 2, which is going to be the same for all you guys. Okay. Second degree of freedom based on the number of participants you have. The overall F value. And the P value. The next thing I need to do is hit that third criterion. I need to tell you where are these groups different from each other. All this is telling me is the means, and if there's overall a difference, but I haven't told you what groups are different from each other. So that's what I write out in the next section here. Okay, so I say participants in the group member left condition felt less basic need satisfaction compared to the inclusion condition, but there was no significant difference with the ostracism condition. Okay, so basically I just wrote out exactly what I told you guys, and I supported it with statistics. So this is that post hoc test. Okay, so from that post hoc table showing that, hey, there's a significant value. And the same thing again from that post hoc table saying, hey, there's no significant difference between a group member leaving and feeling ostracized. I also then have to pick up that last comparison, so make sure you guys get this, that ostracized participants felt less basic need satisfaction than included participants. Okay, there's statistically significant difference there. So now if I'm looking at this, if I'm grading myself, okay, which I'm actually kind of doing as we're going through this exercise, I've got the means in, so that's good. Got the overall ANOVA in, that's good. I've told you guys where all the differences are, that's good. And if I read this without the statistics in it, I have a good sense of where all the results are significantly different from each other. Okay, so this reads in a comprehensive way. All right, I will pause again here to see if you guys have questions about this. Okay, making sense? All right, so I'll look a little bit ahead at a different format. Here for the feeling dehumanized, I actually just reported the F value first. Okay, so I decided to get that out of the way. I then, in this case, decided to give the means while I talked about comparing the groups. So I said participants who had a group member leave felt more dehumanized than included participants. So you can see the mean for the group member leaving, the mean for the included participants. The post hoc test in this case is right here. Okay, so I used a semicolon, I tucked it in right there. So basically supporting the fact that there was a significant difference. Because I've already given the means for the included and the ostracized participants, I can just do the comparison in this last sentence here. Okay, so you don't have to keep repeating the means with the group. Once you've done it once, that's all you have to do. So ultimately, this is the end product that you're going to give me from what we would have done with data collection, with actually giving participants the results. You guys, if we'd had more time, been in the lab, would have actually done the analyses yourself to produce this output. I'm sorry you guys didn't get that experience. Hopefully, with this conversation, with watching Dr. Bernstein's video, you get it as much of a facsimile of that as possible. Okay. So I'm going to super pause at this point. I know we paused a whole bunch to see any questions that you can anticipate, things that seem unclear, parts that you want me to go back through. We can start all the way at the beginning again, whatever is most helpful now that you see the entire process all together. Okay, so I'm going to pause, take a step back, let you guys think about it for a second. And if you have a question, just jump in either through chat, through voice, whatever you'd like.
I got a question real quick.
Absolutely. You can even make it long.
All right. So the feeling dehumanized, when you reported the data there compared to the paragraph above, two different ways of reporting. Are we supposed to do one or the other, or do we have the choice of doing either one of those styles?
Okay, so that's a great question, Jacob. I appreciate you asking it. You can do it however the fuck you want to do it. Okay?
Oh boy.
Okay. And the reason why I be a little bit funny about it is that it has to make sense in terms of how you're describing your study. Your study may not follow this pattern that mine does. You want it to be just clear and simple.
Okay.
So I gave you different looks to give you a sense of different options. Some of you have increasing amounts, so you might want to talk about it as the worst compared to the medium and better condition. It's however it makes the most sense to you, and you can describe it consistent with your hypotheses and the way you set up your study.
Okay.
But again, it comes back to those two criteria that are universal. One is that you have all the correct stats included and you've written them correctly. And two, I can understand what you're saying.
All right, perfect.
And again, with that too, if you want to write one of these up and then have me look at it and give you evaluations on those two pieces, I can do that for sure.
Okay.
All right, so again, I don't want you guys to feel confined that you have to write, plug in your values exactly the same way things are here. Don't do that. You have to write it your way or it will turn out into a mess. If you just try to plug your information in the way that I wrote it, you won't understand it. It won't work. You have to write it out how it fits for you. So great question. Sorry for swearing, but I wanted to make sure you guys felt comfortable doing whatever you wanted.
I invite the swearing at all possible.
What's that?
I invite swearing at all possible times, so you're good.
Okay. Well, if I can get a consensus on that, trust me, the next time I talk, we'll have plenty of swearing in it. I just never quite know. Some students don't mind. Some are like, oh my God, I paid this money for this guy to just start swearing at me. Okay. All right, great question. Other questions, other opportunities for me to swear?